First of all, happy Janmashtami to all of you. I'm very thankful that on this auspicious occasion, on a holy day, all of you are here. In the evening, I see quite a large number of people and very distinguished participants being present for this webinar. And it's my pleasant duty to welcome all of you and the distinguished panelists and the speakers. First of all, I would like to welcome my Honorable Vice Chancellor, Mr. M. Jagdish Kumar, who had been here for 5 years and done an excellent steering of the university in some of the most difficult time. I am especially welcoming him to the center because he is the person behind the center. As those of you who are associated with JNU who knew it earlier, that we have Center for CPOD, Center for International Politics, where you used to cover some aspect of national security. But when he joined and when he looked at our program, besides creating several other programs, as you might have read recently in the newspapers, making the university universal in its approach to knowledge seeking, he also emphasized 2 years back that national security is the important aspect that we are missing in this university, where we need to have a very comprehensive take on national security, not just the international politics or international relation, which is important, but more comprehensive one. So under his guidance, we prepared a program, and under his leadership, this National Security Center, which is organizing this webinar today, visualize that national security is not just international relation, which is important, but also internal security, also the emerging technology like biotechnology, cyber technology, AI, also the traditional thought and belief on national security and strategic culture that are not covered in JNU needs to come together, and we need to have this National Security Studies program at JNU. It must change the narrative of national security, which is being, being propagated by some schools, but which is not comprehensive. Many times it is very narrow in its interpretation. So thank you, our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Jagdish Kumar, for visualizing the need of this kind of center and being present here to address the gathering and to lead us for its research. We also have two very distinguished ambassadors in this panel discussion, and both of them had been posted in Afghanistan, Ambassador Jayant Prasad and Ambassador Gautam Mukhopadhyay. Ambassador Gautam Mukhopadhyay, as Dr. Behra pointed out, will be joining us soon. But we have with us our own Dr. Jayant Prasad, who was a student of JNU earlier, and he has a very distinguished foreign service career. He was ambassador to Afghanistan, Algeria, and Nepal, and he was also looking after in Ministry of External Affairs as a head for the America Division and Multilateral Economic Relation Division. Over 35 years of his public service in this area, he had contributed a lot in foreign policies and its executions. Before joining foreign service, he was teaching at St. Stephen College as a lecturer in history. And then, of course, he was the Director General of Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis, where from he retired. So welcome, Ambassador Jayant Prasad, a person who is associated with JNU, and now as a part of our academic pursuit to understand national security and foreign policy. Welcome to you, and we are looking forward to hear you. Ambassador Mukhopadhyay, who has not joined right now, he's not there, I don't see his name, but he is also a diplomat who had also served into several countries, like in Syria from 2006 to 2008, Afghanistan 2010 to 13. In fact, he was the one who started Indian mission consulate at Saj Affair when in November 2001, Taliban were ousted from Afghanistan. He has also served in Myanmar from 2013 to 16, and we are expecting him soon and we'll listen to him. We have 4 distinguished discussants. Ambassador Mukhopadhyay joined? No.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So
yes, sir. Welcome, Ambassador Mukhopadhyay. Yes. We have 4 other distinguished discussants who can pick up the discussion from these 2 keynote speakers, 2 distinguished ambassadors, or can present their own view on the subject. We have Sri Sesadri Chari, who is a strategic thinker and Secretary General of Forum for Integrated National Security. He is also a Governing Council member of Research and Information System for Developing Country, RIS. He had been in the past as head of the Foreign Affairs Cell of BJP till some time back. And he had been consultant on government with United Nations Development Program hosted in Juba, South Africa. We have another discussant who is not new to the university of our own, who also happens to my batchmate, Professor Santi Siv Pandit. She is presently associated with Department of Politics and Public Administration, University of Pune. Professor Pandit has vast teaching and research credentials. She has authored numerous research publications and had been a regular visitor to JNU programs and activities in the past. We also have a very distinguished, as Ambassador Jain was pointing out, journalist, Mr. Subhajit Rai, who is Associate Editor and Deputy Chief of National Bureau of the Indian Express newspaper. Recently, he was reporting from ground zero from Afghanistan till he came back when the evacuation started. He has vast experiences in reporting international issues, especially related to India's immediate neighborhood. And he has extensively covered Afghanistan before this turmoil as well. The other speaker is Dr. Gaurav Tyagi, who is Assistant Professor at the Special Center for National Security Studies, JNU. He has joined recently, and his specialization is different, but he's quite excited to share his view on this issue that we are discussing today. Before I invite our Honorable Vice Chancellor, let me take a few minutes to introduce the center. As I was saying, that the center was established to create a multi-dimensional approach on national security and to fill the gaps of understanding national security, create a narrative which is much more comprehensive, create a vision and policy inputs which is far more recent, but at the same time, it is also informed by our traditional belief and value system, especially as you see when you are discussing Afghanistan. We know that Afghanistan was a kingdom which was, as Mahabharata, and Professor Santi Sri will tell us more when she says, because I just read a report of her on Facebook that it was ruled by Sakuni in the past in Mahabharata, and Gandhari cursed Sakuni because hundreds of children of her were lost, and she said, I curse you, and you will never be at peace, and you will never be happy, and neither your kingdom. So that is Afghanistan, the place he was ruling in Mahabharata period. We see that Afghanistan had been in turmoil for a long time, and we need to take a call on this subject as well. And so this National Security Studies Center is in form of a special center, which is equivalent to a school, and it is going to be expanded. Right now, there are 5 full-time faculty members. It has provision to join some of you who are participating here, the distinguished panelists, as adjunct professor or concurrent professor, to help us to make it much more realistic and based on your experiences. There are 2 more faculties who are likely to join very soon after the recruitment is resumed. And so this center is going now to take a very comprehensive multidimensional views on national security, completely different from what we had been researching and talking about. The program sequencing is as per the announced program that we have two distinguished keynote speakers who will speak, and then we have four distinguished discussants who will comment on that, build on their discussions, or share their own views on Afghanistan development. And with this, I would just like to reiterate that Afghanistan issue, where we have around 3 billion of our investment made after the Talibans were removed and India started its engagement with Afghanistan, where around 39 million Afghan people are there. There is substantial Indian population in terms of its diaspora, in terms of people who had gone to execute several projects. There is substantial presence of Indian cultural heritage, which is quite old. And we had a very old traditional relationship with Afghanistan, which continued on and off and was somehow interjected by the presence of neighbors in between. So the current crisis over there is something that is impacting us in a very significant way, and we need to chart out our strategy of how to deal with that, and what could be diplomatic, what could be public responses to such a situation. And in order to understand that, we have very distinguished panelists. We'll come to that, but may I invite now our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Sri M. Jagdish Kumar, to give his inaugural address. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Professor Ajay Dubey, for giving a nice background note on the Special Center for National Security Studies. On behalf of JNU, let me welcome the distinguished speakers and the panelists, particularly Ambassador Jayant Prasad and Ambassador Gautam Mukhopadhyaya. These are two distinguished ambassadors who have worked very deeply with Afghanistan, and they often speak about Afghanistan in the media, so it was always a pleasure to listen to them. Sir, both of you, welcome to this webinar and panel discussion. Dr. Sheshadri Chari, I think he will join us soon. He's a great friend of JNU, and I learned many things, the nuances of international relations whenever Professor Shantishri Pandit participated in our faculty selection committees. Sometimes when she was away on the other part of the globe, perhaps she was sitting right in the middle of the night and interacting with us during day time in India and helping us in selecting outstanding faculty at JNU. Thank you, ma'am, for being part of this webinar. And then we have Shubhajit Rai. Most of us, we know about Afghanistan, what is happening there through media. But Rai is someone who has traveled there extensively in the middle of what is happening there, and he has been reporting. And it's a great pleasure to have him in our panel discussion here. And then, of course, we have our young faculty whom we have selected during last 1 year, 1.5 years, who have already been contributing to the growth of our Special Center for National Security Studies. But having said that, I know, because you are experts in this area, you are going to cover a large number of issues associated with Afghanistan, be it regional security, trade, and the kind of terrorism that is being spread through religious fundamentalism, and also ultimately how it will affect the global peace. I'm sure many of those topics are going to be discussed, but as an educationist, one thing that comes to my mind is the complete breakdown in the educational system in Afghanistan. You see, the common people of Afghanistan, they are peace-loving people, and we have great civilizational relationship with them, links with them. And many of the Afghan students, they study in India, and some of them are in JNU. It is always a pleasure talking to them and interacting with them. But unfortunately today, the educational system is completely in a disarray in Afghanistan. And for any country to progress, it is important that the children and the students of that country have access to good quality education, not only at the school level but even at higher education level. But unfortunately, very confusing signals are coming from the Afghanistan, especially when it comes to the women's education. People say that women are not permitted to go to the higher educational institutes, but in some places where the local authorities, they permit them, but in other places they don't permit them. So there is a lot of confusion about what is happening when it comes to the education of the students, and particularly the women's education. And I'm sure many of these topics are going to be discussed as part of this panel discussion, and I'm very, very keen to listen to the experts who are part of this webinar. So once more, very warmly, let me extend my welcome to all the participants in this webinar. Thank you. Ajayji, you have to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Honorable Vice Chancellor, for a warm welcome given to the distinguished panelists. May now invite Ambassador Jayant Prasad to share his view and give the keynote address. Ambassador Prasad.
Actually, I'd prefer to have an interaction, but I'll say something to start off with. The situation on the ground in Afghanistan is utterly chaotic. But you have done very well in organizing this webinar. You have given a questionnaire of 4 points. What are India's options in the immediate, short, medium, and long term? How should India engage with the Taliban? What are the regional and geopolitical contours and the nature of the US involvement? So I'll go in reverse order because it makes more sense to talk about it that way. The pullout of US forces on the 1st of July night from Bagram, the remaining forces were just over 2,500, and there were 17,000 contractors looking after the performance of the helicopters and the aircraft. So once they left, even without informing their Afghan partners, the Afghan chief of station learnt about their departure only at daybreak. So from that point onward, all of the Afghan National Army's air arm was grounded in a sense because they had no maintenance. So the Afghan National Army had no air support, no supply, no medical evacuation, and it became impossible to fight because eventually Afghan forces were running out of ammunition. So the village elders, from the time Zaranj fell on the 6th of August, the village elders in province after province took the decision that it was better to compromise with the Taliban and save lives and property rather than fight. Because wherever a fight occurred, the Taliban had very serious retribution on the civilian population. So that's how they rolled up to Kabul, and on the 15th, they occupied it. And then America, because it had thousands of its nationals and many more thousands of people who helped the Americans in the last 2 decades, who had to be extricated from there, they had to be taken out. So United States redeployed 5,000 to 6,000 of its troops, but they were confined to the airport. And outside the airport, the control of the security situation was completely in the hands of the Taliban. So in a sense, Americans became, until today the remaining forces will be pulled out. They were kind of hostages of the Taliban. So they did whatever Taliban told them to do. So when the bombing took place 4 days ago, President Biden took a few hours only to determine that it was not the Taliban which was complicit in it. And it was the ISIS or the Daesh, its Khorasan wing. So there was American retribution the next day in Jalalabad. This is somewhat odd because the people who have control in Kabul belong to the Haqqani network. Khalifa Jalaluddin, who is Sirajuddin Haqqani's son, he looks after Kabul security, and his uncle, Haji Khalilur Rahman Haqqani, he is the security chief of Kabul as declared by the Taliban authorities. And he has a $5 million bounty for being captured or killed by the Americans. So the Americans had to depend on Khalilur Rahman Haqqani and Siraj Haqqani for their security. So they were in a very odd situation, I would say. So what is the nature of future US involvement? It will undergo a fundamental change because while the United States retains what is called over-the-horizon capability, it has no ears or eyes on ground. And so they don't really know what is happening in Kabul today. So until today, there were two key players in Afghanistan, the United States and Pakistan, where the Taliban got sanctuary and support. But now, since America's salience will be lower because they are simply not there, the salience of others who were in the extended troika, China and Russia, will grow together with that of Iran. And the weight of the other players in Afghanistan will increase and American influence will decline. But America will still continue to play an important role because the last 2 decades, whatever we saw in Afghanistan was primarily on account of American intervention. The 46 other countries from NATO and Western Europe who contributed their forces, they did so not as a favor to the Afghans, but as a favor to the Americans. And when the Americans pulled out, their allies also pulled out. What are the regional and geopolitical contours going to be? After today, there will be a subtle shift in how the regional countries look at Afghanistan. Because in the Doha negotiations between the Taliban and the Americans, which was wrongly called agreement to bring peace to Afghanistan, it was actually an agreement to withdraw US troops from Afghanistan. So what is the situation for Pakistan now? There is great rejoicing and jubilation in Pakistan that their people have won. But Pakistan is also greatly worried about the TTP, which is all about 50,000 of them. They are based in Afghanistan. And there has never been an instance in the last half a dozen years of any conflict between the Taliban and the TTP. In fact, the TTP helped in the Taliban military victory right now. So it is too much to expect that the Taliban is going to crack down on the TTP just because Pakistan wants it. And Pakistan's other objective with Afghanistan is to somehow settle the frontier question, the Durand line. But the TTP and many in the Taliban leadership today believe that the borders of Afghanistan should stretch to the river Indus, including the whole province of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, the FATA region, the frontier administrative territories, and Balochistan, because Quetta, its capital, is populated mostly by Pashtuns. So likewise, China will have a problem because the ETIM, the East Turkestan Islamic movement, their people are in Afghanistan. And Iran will be worried because the Shias, the Hazaras are very badly treated, as was seen in Kabul. In the last 15 days, while Americans and Europeans were allowed to go into the airport for evacuation, and Afghans who paid money and bribes to the Taliban roadblocks, they were allowed. But the people who were not allowed were the Hazaras. The Hazara men and women were picked out, beaten up, and sent back from there. So Iran would be worried now about this. The three neighbors in the north across the river Oxus, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan, their terrorist groups are also located in Afghanistan. So all of them would not like a spillover of what has happened in Afghanistan to affect them. So there is a great opportunity for India to engage in the region. India is engaging with the world, but now the situation is different. And now the way is open for India to intensify its regional negotiations. Should we engage with the Taliban? Of course we have to. There is no option but to engage the Taliban. But engaging the Taliban does not mean agreeing with their philosophy or accepting whatever they do over there. Because we have some interest in Afghanistan. In the past, when Taliban ruled Afghanistan, the Lashkar-e-Taiba and Hizbul Mujahideen had training camps there located by the ISI and under the umbrella of Al-Qaeda. So these camps should not be re-established in eastern Afghanistan. That's priority number one. Priority number two would be, will the Taliban create conditions for our embassy and consulates to reopen and to function freely? Because if they don't, how on earth are we going to continue our development partnership with Afghanistan, which the Afghans want and which the Taliban spokespersons have said they also want? And finally, we'll wait and watch and see whether there is an inclusive government in Afghanistan that has been promised by the Taliban. And Afghanistan continues to remain multi-ethnic and pluralistic in its composition. So, you know, India has always said that there is no good or bad Taliban, but we have a distinction in India between what can be called moderate Taliban and extremist Taliban. Independent Taliban who think of Afghanistan first, and dependent Taliban who work as proxy for others. So we'll watch whether the new Taliban leadership leans towards moderation and independence or not. That's also something to be seen. And finally, my remarks are, what can we do immediately? There are many things to be done immediately. I'm very glad Honorable Vice Chancellor Jagdish Kumar talked about education and students. So we have students from Afghanistan on self-financing basis and under the prestigious ICCR scholarship program, many of whom have studied in JNU. So they have got admission for the new session this year. They must be given visas. Visas must also be given to those Indian employees who stood by us in the embassy and consulates through thick and thin. Come rain or shine, they were by our side, and not one of them quit despite threats against them. Their houses have been chalk marked by the Taliban for future treatment. So before I go further, I want to say that we must understand how the Taliban leadership is composed right now. Taliban is thinking of a council, a higher body which will have no teeth, where President Karzai, Abdullah, possibly Zia Masood, and a few other people would be accommodated. I wouldn't be surprised if an important Afghan leader, Taliban leader, Mullah Baradar, he's also put there. Who are the people who will constitute the government? Already you have the acting defense minister and the acting interior minister. Who are they? They are the heads of Taliban's Eastern and Western military commissions, Qayyum Zakir and Sadr Ibrahim. So what they did on the 15th was they went and respectively occupied the defense ministry and the interior ministry. And different parts of the presidential palace are occupied by different factions of the Taliban. So there is another important faction from Kandahar under Maulvi Yaqub, who is Mullah Umar's son. And he is assisted by Abdul Hadi. There is finally the trio of the Haqqani network. Khalifa Siraj, I talked about him. Haji Khalilur Rahman Haqqani, who is the security chief, and the brother of Khalifa Siraj, who is Anas Haqqani. So they are the people who are controlling Kabul and providing security. It doesn't really matter whether they are in government or not. They are the people on whom the Taliban will have to depend. And the Haqqani network has very close ties with both ISI and the Al-Qaeda. So we have to keep all these issues in balance. Taliban has announced some ministers who are permanent, like the economy minister, finance minister Gul Agha, like the culture and information minister Zabihullah Mujahid. But the defense minister and the interior minister are acting ministers. So the new Afghan regime will not settle quickly. They will compromise. They will have a government functioning within a week or so. But the chief of the Taliban has not yet made his appearance in Kabul. So when he comes, then there will be a government. But that government will see a lot of changes. So what we have to do in the immediate is to provide visas to those who need these visas. We have to provide visas also to those Afghans, like women's rights activists, like artists, like journalists, whose lives are in danger or who fear persecution by the Taliban. So that would also be a test of the new Taliban regime, because they have issued a statement yesterday that they will not prevent anyone from leaving Afghanistan. And I know for a fact that Indian lines may not fly to Kabul for some time, but Afghan airlines are quite keen to resume flights if the visas are being granted. And that would be a test of the Taliban regime to start with. And then we can move to other steps slowly, because after all, the situation is full of uncertainties, and the Indian strategy will have to unfold necessarily as the situation evolves. I'll stop now, but I'll be very happy to take questions. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Jayant Prasad. I think your points are very well noted that we must deal with Taliban. We have no choice. That the regime is still in the flux. We don't know who will be really in power, and that will all depend when Taliban chief appears in Afghanistan and makes the lasting changes or changes which are going to work for longer time. And your suggestions that who should be granted visa and how should India deal with the current situations over there. And these points are very important. I'm sure there will be some questions on that, especially on how we are now taking up Taliban's presence in Afghanistan in terms of recognition, in terms of establishing contact with them. And these questions, of course, will be answered after some time when situation become much more clear, including the civil war that is going on today and since yesterday in Afghanistan, where Talibans are not in total control. I also welcome now Sri Sesadri who has just joined us. Welcome, Sri Sesadri ji. You are here now?
Yes, he's there, sir.
Yes, thank you. So thank you, Ambassador Jayant Prasad. May now I invite Ambassador Mukhopadhyay to share his view. Over to you, sir.
Right. Thank you, Professor Dubey, and thank you also, Vice Chancellor Dr. Jagdish Kumar and the Special Center for National Security Studies for inviting me to this, very topically sensitive webinar. Let me also begin by, thanking Ambassador Jayant Prasad and also mentioning some of our close sort of family and professional ties. His father and my father were friends. We are both from Patna. And in fact, his father actually advised my father that I should join the Foreign Service. So it was a special pleasure when I took over from Ambassador Jayant Prasad as Ambassador of India to Kabul. And of course, he's our mentor, he's our senior, and both me and my wife, who's also a Foreign Service career officer, have benefited greatly and learned a lot from him during our career. So I first of all would like to start by paying my respects to him. As a guru, I cannot, of course, disagree with anything that my guru has already spoken. But I would just like to say that I largely agree with him. I think he has given a very informative and, as usual, very objective, balanced, and wise kind of advice on how we should proceed. There may be a couple of points of difference, which I will sort of highlight as I proceed. But let me start, just to be a little different from him, to start from the order in which the questions were given. It is tempting to add some comments of my own, but I'll try and weave them in. So let me start off with the first question, which is the immediate short-term and immediate, medium, and long-term course of action for India to secure its vital security interests. So, I think we very often look at the first part, short-term, medium-term, long-term, and we kind of forget to really examine what are our vital security interests. So let me try and actually just quickly define that. We should not forget that in many ways Afghanistan was an area through which virtually every military campaign in Indian history, starting from perhaps even before Alexander, took place until the advent of the British, and then the colonialism that came in through the sea. Pakistan has come in between, so it has made a difference. In many ways, Pakistan becomes the immediate inheritor of that first wall or the first bastion to military invasions. But we shouldn't forget that Pakistan's arrival there has also changed the dynamics a lot. And I think the primary security interest that we have is that Pakistan intends to use it for strategic depth. Pakistan intends to use it to promote terrorist organizations and their training and staging grounds to be used against India. And of course, Pakistan would like Afghanistan's relations with South Asia to end at Pakistan. In many ways, Pakistan would like that relations, historic and traditional, people-to-people, cultural, trade, political, and economic relations are severed to the extent possible. And when they talk about geoeconomics now, they actually mean that what they want to do is sort of geo-engineer the relationship towards Central Asia and towards China, with the help of China, of course. I think that's one basic fundamental objective of the Chinese in this system. So in terms of our, let's say, long-term and medium-term interests, our medium-term interests should be to somehow keep this relationship going. Not necessarily by compromising on the state-to-state relations or to government relations, but particularly focusing on the P2P relations. That means the people-to-people relations. Now, I will come to the question about whether we should recognize or legitimize or what kind of engagement we should have with the Taliban later, because I think that's the third point in your, the second point in your set of questions. But let me just say at this point of time that there is a window which we will have to negotiate and explore and see how we can expand. Right now, the biggest problem that Afghanistan faces is the problem of people wanting to leave Afghanistan for their safety, security, and opportunities, as well as for their basic freedoms. The second big problem that they have is a humanitarian problem, close to 400 internally displaced people. So I would say that if India wants to take a people-to-people initiative, regardless of the government in power, the first two items should be to be able to open our country to visas to exactly the category of people that Ambassador Prasad already described. Those who are closely associated with us, those who have worked for us, those who are our partners, those who can be assets for the future. And I would also say those who can keep the idea of an alternative, democratic, or call it freedom-loving, alternative idea of an Islamic republic alive. Whether or not the Taliban rule, whether or not they rule for 5 years, 10 years, or 15 years, the fact that hundreds of thousands of people want to leave Afghanistan today means that the Afghan people do not want the Taliban. The Taliban are not an indigenous organic presence. They are an alien implant that have been suffered and tolerated because, they have no option at the moment. That they have come into this position through the use of fear, terrorism, and intimidation with the completely solid 20-year and even further 27-year-old backing of Pakistan. So I would say that we should keep our humanitarian window open. We should keep our visa window open. Since you talked about scholarships, the scholarships are a very, very important part of our people-to-people relationship. We should keep that open. We should facilitate visas. Even if we do not have relations with the Taliban, we should make space for Afghan students in India. We should certainly keep the medical corridor for treatment in India open. We should also, for the reasons that I mentioned about Pakistan's objectives to sever our historic trade and cultural relations, we should also keep our flights open. We should also keep our trade going, even if this means a certain degree of engagement and cooperation with the Taliban. So I think, and in the medium term, or even in the short term, I think we should also welcome media organizations that will be relocating, they'll be looking for alternative pastures, partly because those media organizations will be the eyes and ears and the voice of the Afghan people and will keep the idea of an alternative Afghanistan alive. We should host and receive think tanks, scholars. Ambassador Prasad mentioned women's activists. I would say generally all civil society activists, women's activists in particular. We should be welcoming to all the people that with whom we share values over the last 20 to 25 years and who have been our partners, many of whom through our scholarship programs and also our educational institutions actually nurtured in the last 20 years. We should not at any cost abandon our children for expediency, for the sake of expediency. So that then comes to the next question about how do we engage with the Taliban without doing that? Look, let us be very clear. What the Taliban want us to do is to legitimize them. The world has legitimized them mainly for their own narrow interests. Their own narrow interests were that Afghanistan had become a headache. They wanted to pull out. And in order to pull out, they did backroom deals with the Taliban, each one of them. Russia, Iran, United States, China, everyone. In the process, they have legitimized an organization that this year alone has attacked maternity hospitals, that has attacked girls' schools, that has attacked minorities like the Hazaras, including our Afghan Sikhs and Hindus. In the case of the Hazaras, raising fears and accusations of genocide. They've attacked civil society activists, media personnel, including an Indian. And in this last phase of takeover, abductions and forced marriages of young girls, making lists of girls between the age of 15 and 45 who could be abducted and married into Taliban families. So we should not forget, it was for these reasons that the United States and others bombed the ISIS in Iraq and Afghanistan. We may have to adjust to the reality of a terrorist force occupying Afghanistan, but we should not forget this background, and we should test them, whether once having use those techniques, use those instruments to acquire power, whether they actually change their spots and they act more responsibly. We should not give a blank check on this. We should test them not by their words and their assurances and their promises. The Taliban have a history of deception, including the fact that they assured the Americans that they would not take over Kabul before the end of August, but they did. They deceived the negotiators who were talking about some kind of transitional agreement. They were never serious. They were equally never serious about the Doha talks and an inclusive government and a political settlement in Doha. So bearing in mind their history of deception, I would say that we should judge them by their actions, not by their words. Now, balancing the two, I would say that we should explore the area of minimal engagement to keep our people-to-people relationship going. They will negotiate, they will try to use it to get more, to get legitimization. For the legitimization, we should actually see what they do with other Afghans, how inclusive they are, whether they actually include the other ethnic communities as well as other political leaders, whether they actually accommodate some of the progressive principles of the Islamic Republic and some of the gains of the last 20 years, which effectively would mean that they have to drop their idea of an exclusive emirate, and they'll have to compromise on between the emirate and the Islamic Republic. I don't see that happening. They did not fight and take over Afghanistan militarily to do that. My fear is that they will accommodate faces from the ethnic communities and from the Islamic Republic to give an appearance of inclusion, but in actual fact, real power will not remain with them. And if real power is not with them, then these same leaders will get discredited. And just as they have penetrated and radicalized elements of the Pashtuns and have started radicalizing elements of the Tajiks and Uzbeks in particular in the north, by discrediting their ethnic and other leaders, they will actually use that to penetrate even the ethnic communities which have so far been opposed to the Taliban. I should also say that we should not forget that the Islamic Republic is not dead. There is a resistance to the Islamic Republic, quite apart from the resistance of the people reflected in their mass exit, clutching onto aircraft from the Kabul airport, which, as Amrullah Saleh said, is just the tip of an iceberg. We should not forget that even the official government has a rump presence in Afghanistan. And in the United Nations and in the world chancelleries, we are still dealing with the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. During the 1996-2000 period, only 3 countries recognized Afghanistan. Ustad Rabbani remained the nominal president of Afghanistan. I think we should very much keep that option open. If that means that we have to suffer some degree of dealings with the Taliban, I think let that happen. Because as I said, the Taliban do not represent even a minority in Afghanistan, or let's say at least definitely not anywhere near a majority. The majority are those people who are voting with their feet to leave. I find it impossible to contemplate that the Taliban will be there forever, that there will not be a resistance, whether it's inside the country or outside the country, that the Taliban will not at some stage make the kind of mistakes that it made that led to 9/11, that will attract retribution and reaction from the rest of the world. And when that happens, our reputation should not be that we abandoned our partners for 20 years and made peace for the Taliban for our narrow, selfish interests. Because then the majority will remember what we did. And that actually begins from our visa policy. At this moment, our visa policy, and we were good enough to announce an emergency visa policy, but in actual fact, there has been very little implementation on the ground. This is already creating a sense of frustration and betrayal in Afghanistan. A country like Albania has hosted a whole plane load of refugees, and we here find it difficult to even talk about temporary visas. And I think this is something that really has to be addressed. We should be very careful not to look at Afghans in Afghanistan only through the prism of religion. We should see them through the shared and common values of freedom, rights, and opportunities that were made available in spite of the flaws of the last 20 years by the Islamic Republic. Then to the question of emerging regional and global contours. I don't know how long I've spoken. I think I've already spoken perhaps something like 15 minutes. So maybe I'll just try and wrap up this last bit in 3 or 4 minutes. I think there's been a complete change, a complete inversion in the alignments in the region. Whereas in the past, we had the Northern Alliance, which led to the Islamic Republic, supported by the United States, Europe, the West and the democratic world, Europe and the democratic world in general in Asia, including India. Now, as a result of the Taliban takeover, you have a complete turning on the head. You have an alliance now between an obscurantist, fundamentalist Taliban, Pakistan, reinforced by China, using geoeconomics, and also supported by Russia and Iran, although we do not know, and I think Ambassador Prasad outlined that, how long that tactical relationship may last. This naturally means that India is completely out of the equation. I think we would be making a mistake once again if we thought of our relations with the Islamic Republic, or rather the people who support the Islamic Republic, as a sentimental relationship. Because the only ally that we will have in this entire region, unless the Russians and the Iranians finally come board when the Taliban and its various partners in the conglomerate finally bite the Iranians and the Russians, which in my opinion is bound to happen sooner or later, our only strategic partner will be that community that we have supported for the last 20 years. And that's another reason why I say we should not sacrifice that constituency. How would it affect India's geopolitical ambition? Quite naturally. And I think lastly, we are coming to the question of the nature of US involvement. The US involvement began as primarily a counter-terrorist involvement against international terrorists that had attacked them. It was a very limited objective. Partly because it was not so easy to separate the polity from from terrorism, the nature of the polity. They were forced to go to a little degree of what you can call it nation building, which Rumsfeld described as nation building light, but also learning from their experiences in Iraq. They expanded their CT program to a kind of COIN, counterinsurgency program, up to the period of President Obama. But in announcing his surge and drawdown, particularly the drawdown, the mission changed to training and equipment. Now we can debate the motives and the thinking behind the US withdrawal. To me, it is very clear that firstly, if we want to be benign, there are two explanations. One is that they were fed up of the Ghani government and corruption in Afghanistan, and they wanted to cut their losses. Good reason. Secondly, that they realized that they were providing effective net security to their principal strategic rivals, China, Russia, and Iran in the region. And therefore, they decided that it's not our problem. Let them fend for themselves. The Afghans, Indians, Central Asian republics are purely collateral damage. But I think actually the United States did not just withdraw to allow them to come. They actually effectively facilitated the Taliban takeover of power. Their preferred route would have been through the negotiating table, but failing that, they had no objection to the takeover of Afghanistan by military force, and there was possibly an understanding to this. In other words, the United States agenda in the region was to not just permit natural level of instability, but to actually encourage and facilitate instability, to destabilize the region, to keep its strategic rivals at bay. I don't think I have the time right now to go into China's interests and the likely clash between China and the US on this, but effectively I'm making 2 points. One point, that there are two countries that have played a role in bringing Afghanistan to its present stage and in keeping this region unstable. The first is Pakistan, and its reasons are obvious. Its reasons are to prevent a united and independent and strong Afghanistan, It is to prevent the recrudescence of the Durand Line and to externalize it. It is to sever its relations with India, and it is for strategic depth. But for the United States, is the second country which is responsible for this destabilization. The first way of it, that it did was that it spent money in Afghanistan, but it did not invest in Afghanistan. It did not invest in a national army. It only invested in a counter-terrorist special forces units that were limited in number and in the end had to fight the entire war for them. They did not provide them with standard equipment of a national army. They did not promote democracy, by which I mean a real contact between the government and the people. They did not invest in the mineral wealth. They did not invest in the economy. They did not invest in the livelihood sector or its agriculture or horticulture. They kept Afghanistan weak. And after having kept Afghanistan weak and imposed its choices as the leaders of Afghanistan and not letting them function through the entire period, a lot of this in order to satisfy Pakistan, it finally betrayed them literally overnight and has dumped the Taliban onto them. And this is no doubt in my mind that since 1994, when the Taliban were first raised and nurtured in Afghanistan, the last 20 years has been a deliberate, systematic military plan using information warfare, psychological warfare, deep embedment, and a very sophisticated military tactics and strategy at the last stage to wait for the final withdrawal of the US troops to take over and occupy Afghanistan militarily through the Taliban, who have an Afghan face, but very much promoting Pakistani designs. There is a contradiction on the TTP. We will deal with that in the Q&A. Excuse my exceeding my time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Mukhopadhyay, for very interesting observations about Taliban being an alien factor, of alien origin, not an indigenous product, and how to engage with Taliban, taking both positions and then negotiating with both the lines, whether we should actively engage or we should ignore it completely. And also highlighting how Taliban coming to power is also an objective of United States to destabilize the region and impose cost on those regional power who were benefiting earlier from the stabilization of Afghanistan. Your questions like we should not look at Taliban from the prism of religion is something we need to discuss again, which is correct.
Not Taliban, I mean Afghanistan.
Afghanistan from the prism of religion. We need to discuss the culture of Afghanistan, because Americans had been thinking that they can export their liberal culture to different places. They can implant it on any territory. Is it possible? Have they been able to do it? Are we doing the same thing, thinking that we can do it? And at some point of time, the Afghanistan, what had been in the past, will emerge as a democratic liberal regime based on some of the contact that we have and some of the people who are there. We need to discuss that. But thank you for bringing a very strong insight on Taliban's presence today, both sides of our options that are available and the negotiation that has to be informed by those nature of the cost that we have. Thank you so much. Now I invite our distinguished discussant, and first of all, Dr. Seshadri Chari, who, as I introduced earlier, was also the in charge of the foreign policy cells of BJP earlier. Dr. Seshadri Chari, welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Ajay Dubey. And it was very nice of you to have made this observation. Compared to my earlier two speakers, who have both career diplomats and who have spent a lot of time in Afghanistan, and they have spent a lot of time devising the India's foreign policy. So I am a novice compared to both of them. So whatever they have said, I have to agree, not only because they are very senior in the profession, but also all the points that they have made are absolutely fantastic points, and it is very important for the government of India, whoever is now at the helm of affairs, to consider these points. But I mean, if you look at it, I mean, since you are a person who is deeply connected with geopolitical situation and also the international relations aspect of it, what we should be importantly looking at is the after the political control over Afghanistan, the situation has been changing. If you see the situation, it's changing by the hour. So what was earlier about an hour back or 2 hours back or 3 hours back is not the situation now. So it's very difficult to sort of uh, make a straitjacket formula as far as dealing with Pakistan is concerned, Afghanistan is concerned. So there is a constant shift. And this shift is not just for the last 7 days or 15 days or 20 days, but the last 7 decades since India's independence, there has been a constant shift in the geopolitical situation in the region, especially pertaining to Afghanistan. So if you go, I'm not going beyond 1947, but if you go a little beyond 1947, the history of shift starts from 1846, 1886, 1894, 1919, very important day for Afghanistan. And of course, subsequent events in 1947. And that is where Ambassador Jayant Prasad very rightly mentioned about the Durand Line. So these are the kind of changes that has been taking place as far as the geopolitical shift is concerned. And this geopolitical dynamics which has been changing from time to time, it has given us a number of challenges. It has exposed some of our vulnerabilities, and it has also given us opportunities. So when we look at the present situation in Afghanistan, the Taliban's takeover after the post-US withdrawal, we have what we call a challenging situation. We have got certain vulnerabilities which we have to look into, and we have a certain opportunities also. So we cannot overlook the opportunities and challenges. That is not the kind of foreign policy that anyone would pursue as far as India is concerned. Again, what happened is India's engagement with Afghanistan has changed along with the changes in Kabul. So we have dealt with whatever the Indian dispensation was pre 1947 has dealt with Kabul. We had cultural relationship with Kabul, and then 1947 onwards we had political relationship with Kabul. We had trade relationship with Kabul, and we have dealt with a number of situations that emerged in Kabul. So Kabul, basically, whatever happened in Afghanistan gave us certain challenges, and we have faced those challenges. Now, after the disintegration of the former Soviet Union, there is a lot of emphasis on multipolarity, and India needs to somewhere take into consideration the power contestations that are emerging on certain areas, most importantly the economic area. So on the economic area, China is essentially challenging the American primacy over regional and global issues. Therefore, when we have to take into consideration that the American withdrawal will obviously impact the way we do business with the rest of the world and the way we do business with the rest of the countries in the region. That is one point that we should take into consideration. Secondly, when we come to the swift takeover of Afghanistan by Taliban, To many, it comes as a surprise. But those who have been watching Taliban for a long time, at least for the last 2-3 years, it, it should not come as a surprise, because American President Biden is not the first person to say that we have withdrawn and we are withdrawing and we are now withdrawn. Trump actually gave a date for withdrawal. Before that, Obama's foreign policy and Obama's during the run-up to the election on both counts, Obama had categorically said that our work in Taliban is over, Afghanistan is over, and we are withdrawing. So we will come to the question of what was their activity, what was their objective of coming to Taliban. Afghanistan is a different story, but the withdrawal of the US was a given. So what was actually happening in the last 6-7 months or a year? Unfortunately, not many in the system seem to have understood actually what is the ground reality in Afghanistan. The ground reality in Afghanistan was that the political establishment and the military establishment were not on the same page as far as protection of Afghan and Kabul is concerned. We will not know, there is not much time to go into the details of corruption and other things, or the omission of the political in Kabul. But the fact is, Afghan, in spite of 20 years of putting their boots on the US or NATO forces, not train a standing army in Afghanistan. What we call the Afghan National Army or the National Army was not a trained army, like even Pakistan has a trained army, India has a trained army, many countries in the world have got trained armies. But Afghanistan's army is not a standing army. It's a force that fought alongside, and because they had knowledge of the ground, the American and NATO forces depended on them. But I'm hearing information, I'm getting information saying that in the last few weeks of American withdrawal, a few weeks before the American withdrawal also, many of the Afghan army people categorically told the American fighting force that now you are on your own. If you want to do something, if you want to take an action, please go ahead and do it. We are not with you. We don't know the veracity, but it can be checked. According to certain military intelligence inputs, number of these groups, now Afghan army, as I said, is not a single monolithic organization. It doesn't have a command structure. So now what happens if you don't have a command structure? Every group that combines what you call the army starts acting on their own impulses. And many of them were not paid even normal salaries for the last 6-7 months. And it seems where the Taliban, which was on the one hand negotiating in Doha, was aware of the ground situation, and they had deputed some people, very responsible people, specifically given the objective of talking to these groups, assuring them that the day Taliban comes into Afghanistan, the day Americans withdraw, we are responsible to pay you. Now imagine an army which has not been paid for 6-7 months. Do you expect to fight on your side? Unless there is a great objective, great reason to fight for you, they won't. So in this kind of a situation, what does the army do? Therefore, these groups quietly with the Taliban and allowed them to take over Kabul. See, this ground reality may hurt some of our strategic and security thinkers also, but they should be aware of the fact that we should have been prepared for this. So if anyone says that takeover of Kabul by Taliban is a great surprise, I'm sure it's very naive to think that it is a surprise. It is not. Another thing is, there are a number of brains in India who know the story of Afghanistan, who know the Soviet Union's emphasis on getting there. And we know about the Great Game. We know why the British wanted to keep Afghanistan as a buffer between Russia and the rest of the region, and also keep Russia away from Indian Ocean. So if that is the situation, what do we do now? Russia was effectively prevented from getting a foothold in the Indian Ocean, but has that objective of not allowing any of the countries to the north getting closer to the Indian Ocean been achieved. For 20 years, the US could have easily chalked out a strong plan for the region. But the problem is that was not the objective of the Americans who came into Afghanistan first. Therefore, it is too much to expect that the Americans could have done this, but they have not done this. That was not their objective. This should be very clear. And as far as India's options are concerned, let us not forget one thing. India's options do not depend only from the point of view of what the US thinks. India will have to start taking into consideration the options that are available to India from India-centric point of view. So from that point of view, if we see what our Honorable Vice Chancellor has said and what Ambassador Jayant Prasad has said and what has been said about relations is concerned, I think we have got more than thousands of Afghan students in India. We have got a number of them in JNU. We have got a number of those students in different universities. Some 10 days back, we had a very good interaction with Afghan students studying in Pune University. It's a state university, and more than 3,000 of them are there. And they were all afraid. They are fearful that once they go back, not that they will be able to go back, but they do not know what they are walking into. They have got huge problems. They may not be allowed to come back. They will not be treated as proper situation. So we have to look after these students. We have to keep them back. We have to bend over backwards to see to it that they get the visa extension. Their financial problems, if any, should be sorted out. We have got a number of organizations. We have got philanthropic organizations, and they should all be put into use so that we don't allow these students or even say professionals to go back in a situation which warrants great problems for them. Therefore, we will have to wait for the situation to normalize, and then we can take a call on it. But it is very rightly said by earlier speakers also that we will have to deal with Taliban. But let us be very clear: dealing with Taliban, engaging with them does not mean that we recognize them. No, it is not recognition. I mean, there are people who wrongly report that India is ready to recognize. No, India is not ready to recognize, but India is ready to deal with Taliban. We'll have to give them time and see that what they ultimately come there. So we'll have to find ways and means to engage with Taliban, but without compromising our stand on democracy, our stand on multipolarity, and our stand of commitment to peace. This is all we have to do. Now, as earlier speakers have also said, Taliban is not a monolithic organization, and Taliban is not an organization of Afghanistan. They do not represent Afghanistan at all. Not even 1% of Taliban represents Afghanistan. Let us be very clear about it. Therefore, if that is the situation, if they don't represent Afghanistan, by force and by sheer strength and by errors of commission and omission of the US and NATO forces, they are in the hot seat. But will they be able to sit in the hot seat for long is a very important question. Now, post withdrawal from Vietnam, there was a dispensation in Vietnam, but they did not continue for even more than two years. I was posted. I was engaged by United Nations, posted in South Sudan. I have seen from very close quarters the South Sudan Liberation Army. Army was a AK-47 toting, gun toting, rebel army which fought pitch battles with whoever they were. But what happened? When there was a situation when it eased and there was a peace accord, subsequent to peace accord, the Liberation Army was converted into South Sudan Liberation Front and became a political party. And today it is that political party which is in the capital Juba, and they are ruling, and we have got relations with them. Look at Nepal, for example. We had a Maoist insurgency there. The Maoists fought pitch battles with Royal Nepal Army. Then Royal Nepal Army was gone. Nepal had a standing army, of course. But then whatever situation changed, ultimately they had to give up whatever they were doing and join the political mainstream. So can India influence? India's influence in South Sudan was great. India's influence in Nepal was also great. India's influence in Afghanistan also can be very good. So we will have to really wait for a situation wherein we are able to find ways and means of dealing with them. Now, very interestingly, two leaders who were very closely associated with Taliban, Suhail Shaheen and Zabihullah Mujahid, they both in two different interviews expressed their opinion that we want to establish normal relations with India. But surprisingly, the most important suggestion has come from this Sher Mohammad Abbas, Stanzeki. In a 45-minute interview in Pashto that has been translated and it is available now online, he very categorically says that we want to maintain political, economic, and cultural ties as usual as it was in previous times, India. It's a very important statement. Political, economic, and cultural. And the most important thing that he has said is that I would welcome a situation where we are able to take forward the TAPI. So imagine, incidentally, Sher Mohammad Abbas was trained in IMA, Dehradun, in the 80s. It is likely that given his stature in the Taliban hierarchy, he could probably become someone like a foreign minister or someone equal to that kind of a situation, which means there is a group, there is a thinking within Taliban also that they cannot just tick off India. India is an important country in the region and Taliban will have to ultimately deal with India. If such a situation is emerging, I think we have got a number of windows, number of openings. This is not to say that whatever Taliban is doing is right. We cannot accept what they are saying. We cannot accept what they are doing.
Thank you.
We cannot do this at all. But at the same time, I think we will have to wait for a situation and do
Thank you.
Our options. Thank you.
Thank you for making very important remarks that our policy is still in flux. It depends on how things develop over there. And any clear-cut policy position on Afghanistan right now, on Taliban right now, is likely to change depending on the situation in Afghanistan. Also that in Afghanistan, Taliban represents 1%, which might be correct. But we also see that when Taliban took over, even the best trained army in liberal tradition, because of various reasons, could not resist Taliban, was not interested in resisting Taliban the way even their trainer American expected them to last 6 months or 3 months, but they disappeared immediately. other than a small pocket of Pansaji that is opposing them, we saw that there is not significant opposition to them. And therefore, we need to make a difference also that though it might be alien, but has it got a very fertile ground in Afghanistan? Is there some support which is very substantial and can make that thinking, that idea last longer than the presence of the current Taliban regime? The second thing also that is very coming up in the presentation, that we must engage Taliban because we have contact with them. You also gave the interview details, but when the reporter in the same interview asked, does your presence and your training as a military officer in IMA make you feel softer towards India? And his response was, it was long back. I just remember at that time I was young, and he didn't elaborate anything on that. So the point remains that the positions that they're taking, reflecting right now, is it informed by their transitory need of having recognition, getting recognition from outside? And the position that world is taking, including us, is informed by the safety of our people over there, our assets over there. So that you very rightly pointed out that we need to decide, not immediately, but after taking a good look at the situation after some time. Thank you so much for your presentations and insights. May I now invite Professor Santisi Pandit. We are running short of time, so please keep yourself to 10 minutes. Over to Professor Santisi Pandit.
Thank you, Professor Dubey. Respected Vice Chancellor, Ambassador Jayant Prasad, whose father was my teacher, so my respects to you. Ambassador Gautam Mukhopadhyaya, Dr. Sheshadri Chari, Shubhajit Roy, Gaurav Tyagi, and all other members in the panel. I would not like to repeat, while I would like to go ahead from the very strong base that has been given. The first issue I want to raise is, in what are the lessons that India has learned? Do we have a framework of power? I somehow think great diplomats, great strategy, but have we had a framework of power? Take the Nehruvian framework. We didn't have any concept of buffers. We gave Tibet away on a buffer, on a platter. Even with Afghanistan, what has been, do we follow the Rajamandala theory of Kautilya? So my first question to all of us is, are we learning the lessons of history, or are we being condemned to repeat them? Are we just a reactive state and not a state that determines its own geopolitical space at least? I'm not saying we go into other battles. If we are a geopolitical pivot, if we don't want a unipolar Asia, which China wants with its wolf warrior diplomacy, and let's remember we have a co-joint enemy on our borders. Pakistan and China have an incestuous relationship, something we cannot break. And their now entry into Afghanistan further creates problems to our own geopolitical space and us acting as a pivot. This is my point number one. Number two, there has been, America has been creating myths. I don't know for what reason, that the Taliban is different from ISIS, ISIS is different from Al-Qaeda, poor Pakistan is also a victim. I think this is again, what to say, some sort of woolly bully, trying to make excuses, because they successfully removed the Taliban 20 years ago and brought back the Taliban again. That is the achievement they have had. So my question is the same ideology, they are the same organizations, they move from one to the other. Two, terrorism has no good terrorists and no bad terrorists. Because I would like to tell you here, sir, one of our friends from JNU, Venkateshwar Rao, who was my classmate, was killed by the Taliban in Afghanistan. I have gone to Afghanistan to work for USAID, to train their foreign service. What have we done? I think India will have to move forward. We can't be a reactive state if we are an emerging power. We are a big power with a small mindset. I think we have to change this. My third point to everybody here is America was part of the creation of these Islamic jihadist groups during the Cold War to fight socialist movements in the Islamic world. If the mother of the Taliban is Pakistan, the father is United States of America. And one understands why United States is so hesitant to hit on the source of terror. Even now when they bombed, they only went up till the border of Pakistan. But the real source is in Pakistan. And here I think India's responsibility in convincing, somehow, I don't know, with all my respect to our great diplomats, we have not been very successful in the information warfare. The Pakistanis and the ISI have used the Goebbels technology of tell a lie and repeat it 10 times, it becomes the gospel truth. India is always reacting. Why are we doing this? There's a huge information war going on now, where they are literally telling the world that these people are good, Taliban are best, and now the Americans are repeating it, our only ally in Asia at this point of time. So this is something very serious. I think somewhere we are failing in our communication with even a country whom we thought is an ally. The other point I want to bring in is the issue of narco-terrorism. See, the Taliban was able to last for 20 years because they are cultivating narcotics. This is the golden crescent, Iran, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, and where Islam doesn't come there. So Islam is only used. And here I would like to add, whenever women ask for rights, most men say religion is in danger and hijack religion. And that is what is happening with the Taliban. In the name of religion, they are oppressing, they're raping, they're miming women. Where are the human rights organizations? If even one person is killed in Jammu and Kashmir, they are out to give us advice. Where is Human Rights Watch? Where is Amnesty International? This is the nexus of the Western left liberal lobby against India. They think Hindutva is more dangerous than jihadi terrorism. Please give me a break. We are failing somewhere as an intellectual class to raise a narrative which has to be a counter narrative to this lies and myths that are being spread in this Afghan withdrawal. And my last point to most of you is, what is the alternative to the global order? If it's not going to be the neoliberal order, the idea of universalism of human rights, democracy, because India stands for these values in the region. We are for secular nation building. We celebrate cultural pluralism. We are for diversity. We are in the Upanishadic way of ekam sat vipraha bahuda vadanti. But is this working now even in our region? This is a question. The alternative is what? It is an authoritarian, Marxist, Sharia, Taliban terror order. Do we want this? How are we going to negotiate out of this? This is something very important. My last thing to most of you is, what has the Afghan crisis taught me as a citizen of a secular, diverse country and as a woman? Please be a strong nation. Support your country. If you have a strong leader, please support him. This is very, very important. Otherwise, we'll have leaders like Ghani who will run away with all the money and with tarmac literally doing. So I think nation first is very important for us instead of we playing kabaddi within our own country. So I think finally, I will only end saying that the US looked after all the mad dogs outside very well. But the one in the house, which it pampered the most, bit it where it hurt it most. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Santisi, for pointing out this, that the world is very diverse and we have challenges of meeting these kind of regimes, not just in Afghanistan, but other places. The policy frameworks that we had been deploying towards them, to treat them, to convert them, to hope that they will be at, if not at this point, but in future point, something of our own liking, something that we value, and therefore we should engage and invest. It also needs to be re-examined. Can we have a policy that deals with this kind of regime as given forever, or a regime that exists rather than needs to be changed or is going to be changed? We need to look at towards that. And we fully agree with you that if you are not strong, you cannot defend your interest. You need to be strong to defend your interest rather than to depend on others or wish the others will change and respect your interest. Thank you so much for highlighting these points. May now I invite the next panelist, Mr. Subhajit Rai, who is Associate Editor in Indian Express and had been covering Afghanistan situation from the ground zero and had reported from there, and he covers India's neighborhood extensively as a reporter. Mr. Subhajit Roy, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Dubey and Dr. Behra, for inviting me to this, and giving me this wonderful opportunity to share the stage with some of the most distinguished speakers, most distinguished ambassadors, from whom I've learned a lot. Thank you, Professor Jagdish Kumar, for your warm welcome and generous introduction. As a JNU alumni myself, it's a great privilege for me to come back and talk to the students, talk to the faculty members, and share my views on the subject. And Ambassador Jayant Prasad and Gautam Mukhopadhyay, they've both been, I have always harassed them with my questions and at odd hours, and they've been always kind enough to sort of educate me or steer me towards the right direction whenever I've reached out to them. Thank you so much, Professor. I heard the remarks of Professor Pandit and Mr. Chari as well, and I would like to add my own journalistic perspective as I was there when Kabul fell. And so I'll just pepper it with some of my experiences that will probably illustrate the what happened in ground zero. So there are 3 or 4 instances that really stood out in my head. Now when I try to distill my experiences from the ground zero. First was when I was traveling from the airport to my hotel the first day. And Kabul is a city of beautiful parks, green patches. And the conflict hits you on your face when you see these parks have been overrun by women, children, just squatting because on the floor of these beautiful parks were essentially internal displaced refugees, internal displaced people who had fled from different provinces, different parts of Afghanistan, because Taliban had already captured those areas. So that was my first sort of face-to-face with conflict, that this was what was happening in Afghanistan. Kabul's parks were overrun by these families, women, children, they're sitting out in the heat, in the open. Next point, ground zero, I think, which where one saw the panic and the desperation was the passport office in Kabul. Now, passport office in Kabul is located in a colony, largely residential neighborhood called Kartese. It's there when I went there in the passport office, the queues were immensely long. There were serpentine queues. People were waiting for hours. They had queued up since 2 a.m., 5 a.m., 6 a.m. And I went there at around 10 o'clock in the morning. And people were returning there. People were coming there for the last 7 days, 15 days, just to get a passport. So people were carrying documents, sheet of folder with the equivalents of the Aadhaar card in Afghanistan, with the identity documents, just to get the passport so that they could get a passport and get out of Afghanistan as soon as possible. And the third instance was when I went to meet a school teacher, a school principal, which had 16 women teachers out of 20 teachers. And in that school, while I was talking to the principal, the first information of Taliban fighters entering the city came on 15th of August at around 11:30 a.m. And this school principal called his teachers, all the women teachers who were in the school that day, and asked them to run, to go back home, rush home for safety. So that told me the level of panic, helplessness, desperation, fear, all of that. And the final scene that which I experienced was on 16th of August, day one of Taliban rule in Afghanistan, when I was at the airport, and the scenes were horrific. There were families, there were men, women, children that come with the bags packed. Some of them didn't even have passports or visas or tickets, but they were all there at the airport wanting to get out of Afghanistan. So essentially, these images, these scenes, what I am describing to you is they paint the picture of a desperate, people who didn't want to live under a medieval era, group which follows customs, traditions, rules, laws of medieval times. So essentially, there were common people who wanted to get out of Afghanistan. Now, I was fortunate to reach the Indian embassy after ducking some of the most challenging situations in my reporting career of more than 22 years. After ducking some bullets at the airport when I was caught in a crossfire, but I was able to get to the Indian embassy, and the Indian embassy was evacuated that night. The next early morning that night, the entire Indian embassy, which is the ambassador, diplomats, staff, and security personnel, they all evacuated in the C-17 Globemaster Indian Air Force aircraft. Having now, one of the things that both Ambassador Jain Prasad and Gautam Mukhopadhyay, both ambassadors, have pointed out about how we should stand by the Afghans who have worked with us. And that is something, is when I talk to people back in Kabul who have worked with the mission, Indian mission there, or people who are friends of India, they are looking to India for help. They are looking to India for easy access, easy visas, either to come to India or to use India as a staging base before they go somewhere else. So that is very important for India to facilitate the e-visa that they've extended, make it much easier for people to travel as and when the commercial operations now open, because India has not evacuated beyond its own citizens and some Afghan nationals. As of last information shared by the government, only about 565 people in all have been evacuated, which includes about 100 Afghan nationals, some 15 third country nationals, and rest Indians. So bulk of Afghan nationals who works with India, or who have stakes with India, or who are friends of India, they need help. And I've been in touch with several of them, and they've all been asking for help from the Indian government. So that is something is very key, very important. The other issue is about engagement with the new Afghanistan, with the Taliban. Now, there are 2-3 elements in that. One is, if you see the Indian statements in the last few months, after reports emerged that India has been engaging with the Taliban discreetly or secretly or behind the scenes, the Indian government has never denied those reports. The only statement that the Emir spokesperson in all their briefings have said that India is in touch with all stakeholders or various stakeholders. That is number one thing to remember. Second is, in the last 1 month, in the month of August, if you look at the UN Security Council statements on Taliban, on Afghanistan, there has been a nuancing of the statement where Taliban is no more being named as a group, and which is visible in the August 16 statement, if you compare it with the August 27 statement, which we reported in our paper 2 days ago. And the other thing is about, should India engage with Taliban? Now, there are 2-3 things. One is, when I explained how India has never denied not engaging with Taliban. Secondly, when External Affairs Minister Jaishankar, he addressed the intra-Afghan talks in September through a video conferencing, he addressed 2 delegations. One was the Afghan delegation, second was the Taliban delegation. So in a sense, he addressed the Taliban delegation and put out India's statement and India's red lines. Now, that was one level of engagement. The other level of engagement was when we saw what I saw in Kabul. When India had to get out of Taliban, in the sense the Indian embassy staff had to get out, they were in constant touch with the new actors there. Otherwise, getting to the airport and getting a safe passage was not possible. So there was a limited engagement for the sole objective of getting out of Taliban, getting out of Afghanistan at that point of time. So there has been contacts, there has been engagement, and I completely agree with Ambassador Mukhopadhyay, who talks about minimal engagement. But that minimal engagement has to happen with India's bottom lines. What should be India's bottom lines? Now, we have seen Mr. Stanekzai's statement, which in a video that was released on Saturday, late Saturday, and on Sunday we reported on it, about how he's talking about India becoming an important player and an important country, and they want to have cultural, political, economic, trade ties with India. Now, these are statements that now need demonstrable behavior on the ground. Unless there is a demonstrable behavior where minorities' rights are protected, Afghans who worked with India, their rights are protected, women's rights are protected. Unless those should be India's benchmark, after which India should be able to engage. So, and the last point I would like to make is that India has right now, Pakistan is on a triumphalist mode. It feels that it has won the game in Kabul. But India has to now engage with other stakeholders, other players in the region, from Iran to Qatar to UAE, all these players who have stakes in Afghanistan and who might have leverages, which India does not have, with the Taliban, with the new setup in Afghanistan, and should work with them to deal with the new situation. With that, I think I will close. But before that, I will just make one point, that as a journalist, when Kabul fell, one's reporter's instinct was to stay there and report, because the story was still unfolding. But because there was a personal safety and unpredictability and fluidity of the situation, we decided that I should come back. So I saw it as a sort of a retreat for the time being. And then I promised myself that to stay on the story, and as and when the situation permits, I would like to go back again to report from the ground, because that is going to be very, very important to be India's eyes and ears on the ground. You need to report as a journalist, you need to report from the ground. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gaurav. Thank you, Mr. Subhajit Rai, for highlighting your experience and your takes on that. And we do agree, as was pointed out by most of the distinguished speakers, that a stand that India is taking, the negotiation, the back channel talk it is doing, the policy that it has of minimal engagement, or saying that it will give visa or the UN position where India is siding with many other countries of not naming Taliban, and the Taliban itself talking very friendly towards India, is all a transitory transitory outcome. Much will depend how things develop in Afghanistan in coming days. All these things that is happening is to manage the immediate crisis that we have. What position India will have, what positions world will have in the United Nations in days to come when things are stabilized in Afghanistan, what policy India will have towards Afghanistan, whether the back channel talk or our engagement with Taliban will continue, we have to see. And but what you said is correct. That's what is going on. And thank you so much for giving the insight from ground zero and sharing your views on that. We have the last speaker now, Dr. Gaurav Tyagi, who is a faculty member in Center for National Security Studies. Dr. Gaurav Tyagi.
Thank you, sir. I would like to take forward what Professor Shanti Shri has rightly said, that if Pakistan is the mother of Taliban, then yes, US is the father of it. And the massive withdrawal of US without adequate consultation with allies and stakeholders, it has led to a sense of insecurity and a kind of betrayal. The Afghan forces that were trained by the Americans using the US military model based on a highly technical spatial reconnaissance units, helicopters and airstrike, they lost their superiority to Taliban when the US air support dried out and ammunition ran out. And the beginning at it is, as it was rightly mentioned by Ambassador Prasad, that about 17,000 contractors, US contractors, that maintain Afghan bombers and attack and air transport aircraft throughout the war for Afghanistan, they left in between without their Afghan counterparts knowing it. So what it meant that any technical issue with the aircraft, be it a Black Hawk helicopter, a C-130 transport, or a surveillance drone, it needs to be grounded. And over and above that, the contractors also took proprietary software and weapon system with them, and they physically removed helicopter missile defense system. Now access to the software that Afghan forces relied on to track their vehicles, their movements, weapons and persons also disappeared. And because of that, real-time intelligence on targets also vanished. The Taliban fought with snipers and improvised explosive devices provided by the ISI, while Afghan forces lost aerial and laser-guided weapon capacity because of this massive withdrawal by US. And with this, it was just a matter of days before Kabul crumbled. And yes, it came as a shock to India. India that stood shoulder to shoulder with US for past 20 years in trying to foster a democratic system in Afghanistan, and invested heavily to amount of about $3 billion in development projects, provided scholarships to Afghan students. Many of them proudly, they study here in JNU, also helped in construction of iconic parliament building with a cost of 90 million. And it would be amiss to say that no part of Afghanistan remained untouched, with about 400 plus development projects that India undertook in about 34 provinces of the country. And before the withdrawal of this US forces, India and Afghanistan bilateral trade reached about $1.5 billion. All this development was a kind of poke in the eye of Pakistani establishment, which alleged encirclement by India. And now with the Pakistan's proxy Taliban in the front seat, Pakistan will try to overturn the same. Over the last 3 decades, Pakistan has viewed Taliban regime in Kabul kind of its umbilical connection with Pakistan that would ensure that ISI would get a free pass over Afghanistan territory that it has coveted for strategic depth in its enmity with India. And while it also ensures that Pakistan will have a supremacy over Afghan routes into the Central Asia. Pakistan will try to use jihadist forces from Afghanistan against Indian interests, particularly Jammu and Kashmir, And in fact, there are various reports that suggest that Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed are back in safe havens in Afghanistan. This can be a problematic from Indian perspective. Also, there were reports of ISI-backed militants fighting along with Talibani jihadists in Afghanistan. And in such scenario, we need to fine-tune our counter-terrorism in line with the changing equation between Pakistan and Afghanistan. The other bone of contention for India is China. As we all know that China has been building a giant global infrastructure network, including road, pipelines, power plants, and ports. That goes by the name of Belt and Road Initiative. India is not a part of it, but Pakistan is. And with the newfound bonhomie between China and Taliban, Afghan soon will be getting lots of funds for these kind of infrastructure network. On the other hand, China, what I believe, is also eyeing on rare earth metals and lithium that account for about trillions of dollars to meet the need of a rapidly growing economy. And they would also like to negotiate with Taliban so that they do not interfere with their Xinjiang province. So this newfound nexus between China and Taliban, it will strengthen the fact that there is an actual encirclement taking place against India. And in the end, I would like to say that from Indian perspective, strategic patience is the key word here. And we should keep an open mind and wait and watch as situation unfolds and take into account our security needs before taking the next step. Whether we should engage with Taliban or not, whether we should have a diplomatic channel open to them, it should be a matter of time. We should wait and see what is next for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Tyagi, for giving a very different perspective on the issue. Now we are running out of time and we have question answer sessions. There are around 11 questions which I have just clubbed. Out of that, 3 of them have been already answered by the presenters. The rest 9 of them, 8 of them, I have clubbed into 3 portions, and I will just share that the questions are in the chat box. The first one is that, is there a schism within Taliban, and each Panjshir Valley role in this Taliban arrival is going to be effective in terms of countering that? And the third one, of course, related to that, what are the possibilities of Taliban being challenged from within? Either of the 2 distinguished ambassadors who are on the ground, they could respond. Maybe give a short response to this. Yes.
Go.
Yes. Please, any one of you, Ambassador Jayant Prasad or Ambassador Mukhopadhyay. There are 2 sets of questions. Maybe one you can take, the other one can take the next question. Yes,
I'm willing. It's just that I, wish to give the first right to Ambassador Prasad.
Yes.
Okay. So I'll, the possibility of challenging the Taliban. Already, one thing about Afghanistan that is widely known is that it's a very young country. The median age of the 39 million people you mentioned is only 19 years and 3 months. So all of them, the majority of them, have been born after 2001. So the opposition to the Taliban, which is not just coming from from Panjshir, but it is coming from, in a sense, the resistance there is representing the opposition of the Afghan youth and the young population, which has not seen the Taliban regime earlier and which has benefited from the changes in Afghanistan in the last 2 decades. So about the schism within the Taliban, I've already spoken about it in my presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. The second set of question is on the lesson that we should learn as a country from Afghanistan experience, where we invested heavily, where we sided heavily with the foreign power, and we thought we are establishing long-term relationship, but within days, everything crumbled. So what are the lessons that we as a country learn from Afghanistan? Related to that is another question. What should India do in case of such an experience if it has to acquire the same strategic depth again in Afghanistan? Mr. Mukhopadhyay, maybe you would like to respond to this? Yes.
Yeah. So maybe I'll take the opportunity to respond to both. We should be very careful of kind of projecting our wishes onto reality. There is no doubt that there are factions within the Taliban. There are no doubt there are differences. There are no doubt there are sections of the Taliban which are very which are chafing at Pakistani tutelage and control. But if you see over the last several years, there has not been a single incident or single occasion when the Taliban have actually criticized or said something against Pakistan. Let me just give you 3 examples. Mullah Baradar. Mullah Baradar was in prison in a Pakistani-US sting operation for 8 years. During those 8 years, he was virtually psychologically broken down. He was revived only to present the soft face of the Taliban in the negotiations with the United States. I have not heard or seen a single Taliban criticism of Pakistani behavior over Mullah Baradar, a very, very respected preacher. Second case, Mullah Omar. Mullah Omar died 2 years before his death was announced. His death was kept secret by the Pakistanis. Not one Taliban spokesperson, leader, whoever it is, uttered or dared utter that Mullah Omar was dead. Third one, Mullah Haibatullah. It's extraordinary that the whole world is dealing, and some people even call them leaders, dealing with spokespersons as if they are leaders. Spokespersons are only articulating the views of someone behind. But we don't see the leaders. Have we seen Mullah Haibatullah? We have seen Mullah Baradar. How often have we heard him speak in terms of what is the Taliban position? We see the CIA director talking to him. We see the Chinese foreign minister receiving him in the foreign ministry. But it's extraordinary that we are dealing with a phenomenon where we don't see the leaders. We don't meet the leaders. We are satisfied to deal with deputy leaders and spokespersons. So before, as I say, watch and wait. Let them come. Let's see the contradictions. They're bound to happen. Haqqani networks takeover of effectively power, which, by the way, the Americans have been preparing the Haqqanis for since the time of even before the US Taliban deal. They gave them space in the New York Times. Sirajuddin Haqqani had an article there, obviously ghostwritten by the Americans themselves. They were preparing Anas and Khalikur and Khalil now for leadership positions, and now they are their trusted partners. So, I will actually believe about the schisms when it actually happens. Of course, we should be ready for it. But as of now, we have not seen those schisms. When they've declared ceasefires, by and large, the ceasefires have been observed by all the Taliban. Secondly, on the question of lessons learned. See, lessons learned, yes, I think one lesson learned is, the main lesson that I would say that has to be learned is that, look, we did a remarkable job in Afghanistan. We were given a very limited space in 2001 after the victory. The international community, the United Nations, the US were very wary of any role for India because they were concerned about what Pakistan would make of it. We occupied that little space and we built on that little space. We built it by through our development projects, our scholarships. What I would say, we built it by and large through our soft power. But we were too sensitive to the Americans. We were not willing to take slightly bolder steps. We did not do enough political work amongst the Afghan political class to try and bring them together. We did not invest. We provided development assistance, but we did not build stakes in the country by investing in possibly one or both sectors, which is the livelihood sector of agriculture and horticulture that I mentioned, or the mineral sector that would have provided the revenues for the government to stand on its own feet, which was one of the fundamental weaknesses of the Afghan government during this period. In other words, we lacked a certain boldness, and we lacked a boldness in political affairs, in economic affairs, and even in diplomatic affairs. I am surprised that India has not used its membership of the Security Council to take a more active and pro people position on Afghanistan. And I think that, and in fact that we have in some ways just followed the lead. We held an emergency session when the Afghans foreign minister asked for it, but we convened a session of our own on maritime security that was addressed by the Prime Minister. You have Afghanistan in your neighborhood burning, and it seems to be a lesser priority than maritime security, which is far away from us. So in the final point I would say is, yes, we should have a foreign policy based on people. And if we have a foreign policy based on people, we will go by the interests of the vast, peace-loving, freedom-loving peoples of the world, whether it's in Myanmar or in Afghanistan. If we tailor our foreign policy only to the centers of power, we'll be following a foreign policy of expediency, which ignores the people. And if you invest in the livelihood sector, which is possible, by the way, in spite of the insecurity, in 2013, we organized the very first and only international investment summit on Afghanistan in Delhi. And I know that our foreign minister was surprised by the turnout for it, but we were not able to follow it up. So this overall lack of boldness, lack of confidence in ourselves, correct analysis will give you confidence, but following other people will not give you confidence. And it's the same on recognition. We should be prepared to be on our own rather than follow the leaders, lead given by other countries in their own narrow self-interest. Because in that case, we will be colorless. We will not stick out. We will be imitation money. We'll be virtually counterfeit. To be yourself, you have to have an understanding and a stake in the people of that country. And if you did, your foreign policy will always be guided by that North Pole star.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Mukhopadhyay, for highlighting, and we all agree that, I think everyone here will agree that we should not follow others. We should decide on our own interest. We did that in case of Afghanistan, depending too much on USA and invested so much. The next set of questions is something I would request other discussion to reflect on, because it reflects on the policy that we followed. It reflects on our foreign policy approach itself. And as you see the questions in the chat box, it says the taxpayer money is involved in promoting the development in Afghanistan. Is it a right approach? Should we do that in a country like this with 3 billion, where we have such a huge population below poverty line, and in investing in a country which has a history of being in turmoil and situation and culture which is not very supportive of such an investment and friendliness. The second question is again related to that. Can we recover somehow this 3 billion amount involved and invested in Afghanistan? Professor Santisi, would you like to ask? But before you respond, let me just put another question to the panel. Maybe somebody will answer. As a student of diaspora studies and a student of African studies, I see that the inertia of foreign policy that is followed since Nehruvian time is so problematic that we are not apt to change that is taking place. In 1946, in South Africa, we cut off all our diplomatic relationship, where we had 5% of our global trade. All other countries had trade and connections with South Africa. 5% for a country which is going to be independent in 47. Under Nehru, we cut our relationship with South Africa. 1994, we resumed our relationship. We invested so heavily diplomatically, politically, by mobilization of world community, mobilization of Indian diaspora in South Africa. But in 2020, we don't stand anywhere compared to the Chinese. They say, thank you, India, you helped, but we have other concerns. And this is not in 2020, even when Prime Minister Vajpayee was there for NAM summit, they referred Kashmir. And when India objected that we will not take it, we'll boycott it, they also said we'll call the bluff. So it had gone to that extent. We invested, we sacrificed so much of our interest. We have seen what happened. And that policy of investing and thinking it will ill result over a period of time, irrespective of the cultural legacy that is there, is something problematic. The second thing I would also like to point out, take 1 minute, is inertia that I am discussing. Dissociation with diaspora was trumpeted by Nehruvian foreign policy holders, by leaders, by the bureaucracy, so much so that when in mid-90s the policy was to be changed. It took 10 to 15 years just to convey the hard policy decision in every strong term by the political leader for bureaucracy to accept that and then to reverse the policy. And therefore, when this is investment policies for promoting goodwill is involved, should we take a relook on the whole thing and say that first we should focus on people who are within the country below poverty line, and then we should prioritize the massive investment that we are making to, and with a lot of problems in that investment. I know because I have studied 20 billion plus investment in Africa, how much corruption, how much inefficiency, how much delay it is, and how much vested interests are involved. We should try to focus on building our strength first and then invest minimal outside till we become in a position to invest without cutting the support to our poor population back home. I think these are the bigger questions, but that also is in somehow related to Afghanistan, where we invested $3 billion. We cannot recover easily from there, in my opinion. But I would like to hear both the ambassador. I have made, sorry to make some strong remark, but that is what I felt as a student of international relations, that things need to be changed drastically. And when the change is suggested, discussed, it's strongly opposed by the foreign policy makers. So it's open for discussions. Whoever wants to take, please.
Yeah, I'm happy to respond to that,
Yes,
Professor Dubey. Okay.
Please, please.
You know, I must say that when we invested in Afghanistan, we did not invest in terms of a financial return on investments. They were actually gifts for the Afghan people, and what we expected in return was goodwill and political support. I believe that the moment we have completed a project and the people value what we have done, that emotional return we have got. If today our standing in Afghanistan is what it is that emotional return that we have got from our investment and all the partners that we have made in the process. So it's also an investment in people. I do not consider it at all a waste of people. In fact, I would say that this whole philosophy of my country first is a dead end. It has to be a philosophy of mutual interest and mutual benefit for both countries, or in fact for the world. Because my country first has exactly led President Biden into this situation where he has left Afghanistan, abandoned the Afghans, and landed in the kind of mess that we see ourselves right now. So I, with due respect, Professor Dubey, I very strongly disagree.
Expected that. Thank you. I expected that. No problem.
So I have a
yes.
small footnote
Yes.
to what Ambassador Mukhopadhyay has said. I completely agree with him because our investment in Afghanistan was a people-oriented investment. And by the way, what has been done in the past has been done. But even in the future, we have to have, being a student of history, I go back to the Anal school, and I must say that we have to have a sense of perseverance for the longue durée. for the long term. We have to remain engaged there. And our past engagement has not been wasted, because I don't know about South Africa, but about Afghanistan, let me say that the CIA, every year in the past 20 years, they did a survey in Afghanistan of 50 entities, including 10 countries. The entities were President of Afghanistan, the police chief of the province, the provincial council chief of the province, the governor of the province, Japan, USA, China, etc., etc. So the question were, do you have a favorable, most favorable, or unfavorable view of the following? And in all the years, 20 years, the Afghan people chose India as having a favorable impact on the country and a favorable view of India. So in that sense, the investment that we have made, although we are not present today, our embassies and consulates have pulled out, but we have that inheritance in Afghanistan, because when we went back to Afghanistan in 2001, we had created a hiatus with people with whom we were connected through centuries. All the Afghan communities in India, from Punjab to Bengal, they belong to eastern and southern Afghanistan. Sher Shah Suri came from Paktia. So all these areas, Nangarhar, Paktia, Paktika, Khos, Ghazni, Kandahar, they were connected with India. And when the Taliban came there in 2001 and we vacated our embassy, we discovered new friends in Afghanistan. The Tajiks, the Hazaras, the Uzbeks, the Turkoman, the Kizilbash, and so on. And so we have our old friends in Afghanistan, we had our new friends in Afghanistan, and we reconnected with our old friends in the last 20 years because of our projects. So what Gautam mentioned as a weakness is also a strength, because the Afghans see India as a disinterested partner. And we did not promote any political allies in Afghanistan. It is a weakness, but it's also a strength, because people of all ethnicities have regard for India, and we can build on that in the future. So even the Pashtuns, even the Taliban is mostly made up of Pashtuns, but not all Pashtuns are Taliban. So in the Pashtun community, there is a high regard for India again, and that's something to build on. And that is what pushes the Taliban leaders to reach out to India now and to say that they want cultural, social, and political ties with India. Why do you think they are saying this? Because there is a certain pressure also on them from inside, because there are people in their midst which believe that India has to play a future role in Afghanistan, which has been eclipsed by the present situation. But opportunities are bound to open up soon.
Thank you.
May I add to?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah.
You and
So,
Professor Santisri also raised her hand. Yeah.
Yeah, so I would like to completely agree with both the ambassadors, and I would in fact argue that why $3 billion? Why not $6 billion of investment? Because essentially we must upgrade our engagement with Afghanistan, come what may, for the people of Afghanistan. In fact, in the past, why it has not, one of the reasons it could not go up beyond this investment was the absorption capacity of Afghanistan, and it's because in its governance structures. Now, in fact, in future, as both ambassadors pointed out, the goodwill that we have in Afghanistan, I would urge you to just ask any Afghan you know and ask them about India's perception of India vis-a-vis Pakistan or vis-a-vis China, and you will know the answer. In fact, all the scholarships, all the medical treatment, the smaller projects that high impact small projects that have been done in Afghanistan, the more India does, better it is. In fact, in the next few years, if India has to ramp up that particular engagement, it must do that. It must not shy away from investing in the people of Afghanistan. And in fact, I would also say that, as Gautam Upadhyay, he pointed out, that in agriculture, in minerals, in all these livelihood areas, we must invest more in Afghanistan, in their skills, in their livelihood issues.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we fully agree. We must invest people, but we should also prioritize people who are below poverty line in a very large number in this country, who not only suffer, but they are also someone who are politically very important for us in terms of the left liberals trying to manipulate them and not allowing resources to go to them. Yes, please go ahead.
Let the lady have the last word.
Yes.
So I would only say that agreed. I totally agree that we should help our neighbors, and it is in the interest. But at the same time, what has the Afghan crisis taught us? It has taught us the realist principle of survival, security, and self-help is at a national level. Nobody comes to save India. When we are fighting the Chinese in Galwan, nobody comes. We have to fight for ourselves. So I would say charity begins at home. Let us begin the charity at home and then go and help others. I'm not against helping others, but I'm only saying that unless we are strong, unless we are decisive, unless we are proud of our civilization, we are the only civilization state other than China to enter the fourth industrial revolution. Then only we can rise high. Thank you, Ajay.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we have already exceeded time. So now I would invite Dr. Lakshman Kumar Behra, who is a person who is behind this program, contacting everyone, organizing all the required logistic for this. Dr. Behra is a faculty associate professor in the Center for National Security Studies, and he earlier worked at IDSA, and he has a background of defense studies in the past. Dr. Behra, over to you for a vote of thanks.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the kind words. Well, I think the last 2 hours and 17 minutes have been highly enriching and rewarding. I'm sure the audience, particularly the students whom I see in large numbers, would have benefited immensely for their further academic work. Well, this is my great pleasure and privilege to propose the vote of thanks. At the outset, I, on behalf of Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor M. Jagdish Kumar, and the entire JNU fraternity, would like to express our heartfelt gratitude and thanks to all our distinguished external panelists, Ambassador Jayant Prasad, Ambassador Mukhopadhyay, Dr. Chari, Professor Pandit, and Mr. Roy, for accepting our invitation and sharing their expert opinions on the subject, which has vast implications on India's national security. We deeply appreciate your views and are grateful for your time, and we definitely look forward to having you again in the near future. This event would not have been possible without the wholehearted support and encouragement from our respected Vice Chancellor, Professor Jagdish Kumar. Sir, I, on behalf of the Special Center for National Security Studies, and particularly the chairperson, Professor Ajay Dubey, express our sincere thanks for all your support and encouragement. I take this opportunity to thank Professor Ajay Dubey, chairperson SCNSS, for guiding us and for his able leadership in arranging this event. I'd also like to thank my colleagues, Dr. Gaurav Tyagi, who incidentally was one of the panelists in today's event, Dr. Naresh Verma, Dr. Ankur Yadav, and Ms. Ayushi Ketkar for their valuable support in organizing this event. Last but not the least, I would like to thank all the participants who have joined in large numbers, interestingly, not only from India, but also abroad. I can see a few people joining also from London. That is very heartening to see. I thank you for all your time and attending this event. And with this, we come to an end of this program. Thank you. Jai Hind.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry, we raised some red herrings for discussion. To yes. Thank you.